Hello, welcome to Science and Mathematics All Around. Our first topic today is about body systems, genetics and diseases. At the end of this class, you will be able to describe the basic unit of human body. You will be able to describe the structure and function of DNA, its role in genetic inheritance, and understand the genetic components of diseases and the interplay between the genetic and environmental factors. Now let's start our lecture. So in today's lecture, we will discuss about cells, cell components and functions, DNA, communicable and non-communicable diseases, human microbiome, and then we will talk a little bit about immunity and vaccines. To start off our lecture, let me ask you a small question. What makes up your body? So if we break it down, we know our body is comprised of many organ systems. And these organs are comprised of different organs, which in turn is made up of different tissues, and at the most fundamental level there are cells. So cell is the basic building block of life. It's the smallest structural and functional unit of any organism. If we look at the structure of the cell, how the cell is made up of, you can see a cell is made up of mainly three components. Basically a human cell or the animal cell. It made up of a plasma membrane that is surrounding the cell. It made up of cytoplasm, which composed of two main parts, and then it composed of a nucleus. If we briefly go into each of these components, the first part is the plasma membrane that occur at the most outside of the cell. The plasma membrane is usually composed of two layers. You can see two layers here. Two layers of phospholipids. And among these two layers, you can see proteins and different sugar molecules attached to it. So what does it do? It regulates the entry and exit through its channels. It protects the cellular contents. It facilitates the communication between cells. It maintains the shape of the cell. It gives a shape to the cell. So these are the main functions of the plasma membrane. Our next component is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is composed of mainly two parts, cytosol and organelles. Cytosol is the semi-transparent liquid matrix that is mostly composed of water. And in addition to that, there are ions, amino acids, proteins, waste products, many things. And in these cytosols, you can find organelles. Cytosol is the place where numerous cellular processes takes place. And the main other component is the organelles. There are many organelles in the cell, but if you are required to list a few that is very important, you can say ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, mitochondria, nucleus, such things. And if we briefly look into these structures, ribosome is the site for protein synthesis. This is where your proteins become produced. The ribosome composed of mainly two parts. You can see a large subunit and a small subunit. And this whole part is made up of rRNA and proteins. These ribosomes occur freely in the cytosol, or sometimes they are attached to the outer surface of the nuclear envelope and the outer surface of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So what is endoplasmic reticulum? Endoplasmic reticulum is a series of interconnected membranous canals. You can see they start from the nuclear envelope and they are interconnected. All the canals are not closed, they are interconnected. There are two types of endoplasmic reticulum. One is smooth endoplasmic reticulum. You can see there is nothing outside on it. It's called smooth endoplasmic reticulum. It lacks ribosomes. And the other one is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. You can see outside there are ribosomes on the outside surface. So there are two different functions that are attached to this endoplasmic reticulum. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is where the lipid synthesis happens. And the rough endoplasmic reticulum, since it has ribosomes, so it's a place where the protein synthesis happens. The next one is the Golgi complex. You can see it's a bit similar in structure to the endoplasmic reticulum, but there are main differences. So this is a stack of closely folded, flattened sacs. But the main thing is they are not interconnected. They are closed sacs. So Golgi complex is like if you take it as a sorting center. So it collects all the vesicles that comes from the endoplasmic reticulum. It sorts them, it modifies them, and then it dispatches to their correct location. So Golgi complex is the major site for carbohydrate synthesis. The proteins from ER packages into secretory vesicles inside the Golgi complex, and during this time the molecular composition and sometimes the metabolic functions of the proteins becomes changed. The next important one is the mitochondria. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell. Why we call it powerhouse? It's where the energy is produced. It is enclosed by two membranes and it contains small quantities of DNA. So mitochondria is place where aerobic respiration occurs. Why it is important? Because the aerobic respiration produces energy in terms of ATP. Next most important component of your cell is the nucleus. If mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, nucleus is the control center of the cell. Similar to mitochondria, nucleus is also enclosed by two membranes, two nuclear envelope membranes. And it has pores that connects the nucleoplasm with the outside world. The nucleus contains the most important component in our body, the DNA or our genetic material. So it regulates all the metabolic activities of the cell and it stores entire hereditary information in our DNA. So all your cells contains the blueprint of who you are. So this blueprint is known as DNA. So why we call DNA a blueprint of you? If you take an example, this is a blueprint of this house. And it will give you all the details about how many rooms are there, how many doors are there, how many windows are there, what is the size of each of these rooms. So similarly, the DNA also gives everything about yourself. DNA contains the codes for instructions needed for organism to grow, develop, and survive and reproduce. It is a genetic material that stores and transfers information from generation to generation. Now let's dig deep into DNA. So what does DNA stands for? DNA stands for deoxyribose nucleic acid. So DNA is kind of a nucleic acid. It's a genetic material that passes from one generation to the next. It stores all genetic information. It codes for proteins. It is responsible for determining all the traits of your organisms, such as your blood type, whether you can roll your tongue, your curly hair, the condition of your hair, your eye color, your hair color. All these information are stored in your DNA. So what is this DNA made up of? DNA is a nucleic acid, so it's made up of very small components. These small components or the building blocks of DNA is known as nucleotides. And each nucleotide contains a sugar component that is known as deoxyribose, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base. So the sugar component deoxyribose is known as the deoxyribose. That is where this nucleic acid gets its name. The nitrogenous bases are of two types, pyrimidines and purines. The pyrimidines include thymine and cytosine, and purines include adenine and guanine. You can see the difference between these two structures. Purines are much bigger than pyrimidines. They have two rings compared to the one ring structure of pyrimidines. So DNA, it is actually not just one strand. It's two strands that are arranged in a double helical structure. So you can see it looks like a staircase that is a swirling staircase. So you can see there are two strands, and this is the base of each of these strands. So this base is known as sugar phosphate backbone. The sugar phosphate backbone is comprised of deoxyribose sugar molecules and connected to phosphate groups by phosphodiester bonds. So as I told you earlier, DNA is composed of two strands. So how does these two strands bind together? This connection is made up by hydrogen bonds. The hydrogen bonds occur between purines and pyrimidines. Usually, always the guanine connect with cytosine by 3 hydrogen bonds, and adenines connect with thymines with 2 hydrogen bonds. So the base pairing always occurs G with C and A with T. So where does this DNA store? How does this DNA store? We know that it stores inside the nucleus. So how does it store? The DNA, this is the DNA, they wind up very tightly and then they fix into these structures called chromosomes. These chromosomes you can find inside the human cell. DNA stores genetic information as codes. So the way that they store the information is as codes. The genetic code is the sequence of bases inside the DNA. So if you look at this, this is a genetic code, the sequence of bases. So how does the sequence of bases pass this information to produce protein? That process happens like this. So is this DNA? DNA transfer its information into RNA. This process is known as transcription. You can see when there is T, it becomes A. It's always complementary. T always binds with A. And A, but this is, you can see the letter is different here. Why? Because this is an RNA. RNA do not have thymine, they have uracil instead. So instead of T, A binds with U here, and C binds with G, G binds with C, G binds with C. So you can see there is a pattern that goes on. So this process is known as transcription, that is converting the DNA information into RNA. And then the RNA will be translated into protein. This process is known as translation. In this process, the codon, that is 3 bases, translate 1 amino acid. And when these amino acids combine together, they will make up the protein. So now we know how does the DNA transfers into proteins. So these proteins, they sometimes act as enzymes in your body. They sometimes act as hormones. They act as antibodies. They act as many different forms. and these forms make up your body. So proteins are structures and machinery of life. So I earlier told you DNA is inherited. It passed from one generation to another. So how does it go? Maybe you have heard sometimes some people say, you just look like your mom, or you just look like your dad. It's because the genetic material of ours comes from mom or comes from dad. Sometimes we look like both of them. That means we are a combination of genetic material that comes from your mom and that comes from your dad. But how can we say you look exactly like your mom or you look exactly like your dad? You don't resemble your mom. That is because if you resemble someone, the genetic material, the genes that comes from mom is dominant, more dominant. It expresses strongly than your father's. If you look exactly like your father, then that means your father's genes are more dominant, more expressive. So in this way, a child would get one part of the genes from mother, another part of the genes from father. And child is made up as a genetic makeup of mother and father. So how does these genetic materials comes from? So from father, the sperms comes and the sperms have one set of chromosomes. And from mothers, we get the eggs. Eggs has another set. So that's why it's called N and N. When they combine together, it will form U that has two sets of chromosomes. So you will get chromosomes, one per pair from each parent. So how many chromosomes does human normally have? If you get 23 chromosomes from mother and 23 chromosomes from father, that means humans usually have 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs of chromosomes. These chromosomes, the 46 chromosomes, they usually arrange in pairs. So each parent contributes one chromosome to the pair. And if you see the chromosomes, there are 23 pairs as I told you before. The 23rd pair is known as the sex chromosome. That is the chromosome that determines whether you are a girl or a boy. So if you are a girl, this chromosome will be X and X. If you are a boy, this chromosome will be X and Y. The other chromosomes are known as autosomes. So why it is important to understand inheritance? Why does it matter so much? Because it influences on characters. The chromosomes carries information for producing proteins that determine the characters like eye color, blood type, susceptibility to different diseases. So we can say, understanding genetics, we can explain the physical and health related characteristics in your daily life. The second one, we can predict characters. So inheritance patterns tells you which characters you will get from mother or from father. And similarly, it will predict the disorders as well. So it is important for the health management because it's important that we can anticipate what risks we they have and we can make the informed decisions based on that. Not only that, the information in the DNA is important for family planning, mainly the genetic counseling. So if your family has some kind of a disease that is passed from one generation to generation, then when you want to have kids, you understand the risk of having kids. So you can get informed decisions about having kids, or you can take proper precautions for that. And the most important one of these is personalized medicine. So we all know about medicine. Medicine, when we get medicine for a certain disease, These medicines, for some people, it quickly works. Some people, it does not quickly work, it takes long time to work. But for some people, it will have side effects. But if you have personalized medicine like we have it now, the personalized medicine, it will make the medicine based on your genetic makeup. So if you will not have any side effects, and all the medicines that you take will be effective for you, efficiently effective for you. So this is why the understanding of this inheritance matters in daily life. So how can we identify this risk in daily life? Simply by genetic testing. So you can do genetic testing for adults, you can do genetic testing for children. Even you can do genetic tests while you are still inside your mommy's tummy. So pregnant ladies can do genetic testing for their unborn child. These tests are known as prenatal tests. So if there are big abnormalities inside the baby, so the mother can know beforehand. So they can take precautions. So if I take an example to further explain this to you, the best example for this is the blood type determination. If I ask you what is your blood type, some people will say A, some people will say B. If I ask you how many blood types there are, basically there are 4 blood types: A, B, O and AB. These blood types are usually determined by your chromosome 9, a gene in your chromosome 9. A and B blood types are dominant blood types, more stronger. O blood type is recessive blood type. A and B genes, I'm talking about genes now, I'm not talking about blood type. Genes, A and B genes are codominant. If they express together, they cannot express A or they cannot express B. They will express another blood type known as AB. So first I want to understand mainly 2 terms, a phenotype and genotype. Phenotype is the character that is expressed to the outside world. For example, blood type is a phenotype. That is the character. What is genotype? Genotype is a genetic composition. That if you look here, this is a genotype. And the phenotype of this is blood group A. So if you see, when the 2 letters or 2 alleles of your gene, if they are 2 different letters, we usually call it heterogeneous. If it is the same letter, we call it homogeneous. Remember these 2 terms because we will use it in the future. So let me first understand how this works. So first, if you get A allele from your mother and if you get A allele from your father, your blood group will be AA and your phenotype will be A. If you get A from your mother, if you get B from your father, because A and B are codominant, your blood group will be AB. If you get A from your mother and O from your father, your blood group will still be A because A is dominant over O. And if you get O from your mother and O from your father, your blood group will be O because it's a recessive. So let's go into some of the examples so you can understand this further. If your mom is heterozygous A means the only available genotype is AO. And if your dad is heterozygous B, it should be BO. So what does the children look like? If from mom A and from father B, the blood group is AB. From mom A, father O, then the blood group is A. O from mother and B from father, blood group is B. O from mother and O from father, blood group will be O. So you can see the genetic composition. How does it prepare? Let's take another example. If your mom is heterozygous A and if your dad is homozygous B, you can see all the children will have AB blood group because AA and BB. So the oldest children will get AB. If we take another example, if your mom is heterozygous A, that is AO, if your dad is homozygous O, that is OO, then what will be your blood types? You will get A blood group, you will get O blood group. So there will be only 2 blood groups in the children. So similarly, you can identify how this genetics works, how it helps you to determine the blood group. Not only the DNA carries information about the traits or characters like blood group, it also gives you an understanding about different diseases. So we can use it to predict diseases. So our next part will be mainly on predicting genetic disorders. Genetic disorders. What are genetic disorders? They are health problems caused by one or more abnormalities found in your DNA. They can be heritable or they can be unheritable or non-hereditary. Hereditary means it can pass from mother to the children or father to the children. Non-hereditary means it will not pass from parents to the children. So there is different patterns that these characters pass from one generation to another. The characters may be passed from autosomal chromosomes or either passed from sex chromosomes. Based on that, there are mainly 2 patterns, autosomal patterns and X-linked patterns. So we will discuss these 2 types of patterns later. For now, let's move on to what are the different types of genetic disorders. There are mainly 3 types. Single gene disorders, that means diseases that are caused by mutations in a single gene. Examples include sickle cell anemia, the cystic fibrosis likewise. Then the second group is known as chromosomal disorders. In here, there are no mutations that is occurring on the genes. Instead, there are abnormalities or changes in the structure that happens to the chromosomes. The example diseases include Down syndrome, Turner syndrome likewise. Then there's another group that is called multifactorial disorders. Multifactorial disorders, they involve multiple genes, and not only that, they involve environment as well. So there are different factors that cause the disease. These kind of diseases include heart disease, CVD, cancer. So these includes these kind of diseases. Let's go into each of different types of diseases. So first let's talk about single gene mutations. What is a mutation? Mutation is a change that occurs in a gene. So these kind of disorders that occur in the autosomal genes include sickle cell anemia and thalassemia. Not only that, there are many others, but this is just an example. So there are 2 ways that autosomal genes can, hereditary diseases can be passed on. One way is autosomal dominant, one way is autosomal recessive. Autosomal dominant means the change happens in the dominant gene in the autosomes. So let's say this is the dominant gene and the dominant gene is changed in mother. So if only one copy of the gene, if the gene is dominant, one copy of the gene is enough to express the disease. So you can see all the children that has at least one copy can get sick. But in contrast to this, if you take an autosomal recessive pattern, in order to get the disease, you need to have 2 copies because the change happens in the recessive genes, not the dominant gene. In order to get the disease, you need to have 2 copies. What happens if you just get 1 copy? Then you become the carrier. Carrier means you have the disease component gene in your body, but you will not get the disease. You can pass that disease to someone next in line, next in your generation. Okay? And examples include sickle cell anemia. So if you talk about sickle cell anemia, these are some of the diseases that commonly occur in Thailand. This is the abnormal hemoglobin, presence of abnormal hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is usually oval shaped, but in sickle cell patients, the hemoglobin looks like a sickle cell. You can see a sickle cell. When you have sickle cell anemia, the red blood cells become very fragile and they are prone to break. So when they break, you will have low number of red blood cells in you. Then you will get the condition known as anemia. In addition to that, there are various symptoms that you can have when you have sickle cell anemia. Another example is thalassemia. Similar to sickle cell anemia, this is also a single gene mutation. This also happens because of the abnormal red blood cells. Then, as I told before, normal red blood cells are oval shaped. But in thalassemia patients, they looks like the structure changes. It looks like a square shaped. So the symptoms also include anemia, fatigue, deformities in the facial structure, and growth delays and pale appearance. So these are some example diseases. In single gene mutations, sometimes the gene mutations occurs in the sex chromosomes. For example, X-linked diseases. That means X-linked means the mutation occurs in the X chromosome. If it is occurs, if let's say X-linked recessive, you can see, as I told you before, in order to have the disease, you need to have 2 copies. But since this occurs in the X-linked chromosomes, X chromosome, and the boys only have 1 X chromosome. So the boys, even since they have only 1 X chromosome, they will get the disease. But in girls, in order to get the disease, they need to have 2 chromosomes, 2 copies of the, not chromosomes, the copies of the gene. So if you look at this example, in this example, the father is healthy and the mother is a carrier. That means mother has 1 copy. So mother is not sick, but she carries the disease. So the son always gets Y chromosome from mother and healthy X chromosome from mother. Y chromosome from father and healthy X chromosome from mother. Then the son is healthy. This daughter get mutated chromosome, the disease chromosome, disease gene, disease copy from mother and healthy X copy from father. Since she has 1 copy, she acts as the carrier. This son gets Y chromosome from father and the disease copy from mother. Even though he has just 1 copy, he can get sick because boys don't have 2 X chromosomes. So in single gene mutation diseases, mostly the boys in the families are at high risk. So example diseases include hemophilia and color blindness. So hemophilia is an X-linked recessive disorder. In this disease, it happens like it will not easily clot. The DNA, the blood will not easily clot. So you will bleed a lot, and this is a dangerous situation because if you start bleeding outside, you can patch it. But what happens if you start bleeding inside? You don't know, and it cannot be stopped easily. So that is why it's very dangerous. And another one is color blindness. So why the color blindness is so important? You cannot get driver's license if you have color blindness. What is known as color blindness? You cannot differentiate between red, green and blue colors. Mostly you cannot differentiate between these colors. So this is also a X-linked recessive. So if you are a boy, you are at high risk if your family has these changes in your family. So these are some of the examples of genetic disorders. You can look at it later. And then we will go to the second category, that is chromosomal disorders. In chromosomal disorders, unlike the single gene, there's nothing happens with the genes. Instead, there are abnormalities happens in the chromosomes. If you look at it, usually chromosomes occurs as pairs, but in a children with Down syndrome, the chromosome occurs, the 21st chromosome occurs as 3 copies. That is why the disease is there. This is the Down syndrome, the 3 copies in the 21st chromosome. So it can cause physical growth delays, it can cause different characteristic facial features like round face, large tongue and almond shaped eyes, skin that covers the inner eye, cognitive delays. These are some kind of symptoms that you can see. And here you can see some of the other diseases, chromosomal disorders that we find in daily life. The last one is the multifactorial disorder. Multifactorial disorder, as I told you before, these are caused not just by one gene, maybe by several genes. And also, in addition to gene factor, there are other factors like environmental factors. So what are these most common other factors? The first one is the environmental factor, which includes pesticides, the pollution in the cities, those kind of factors. Obviously, genetics is one kind of a factor, mainly the family genetic history. In addition to that, there are behavioral problems like physical inactivity, smoking, which is the main reason for many of the diseases, drinking, drugs. In addition to that, there are metabolic conditions like high blood pressure, high blood sugar. Let's go on to our next topic, diseases and immunity. In this section, we will mainly talk about diseases, different types of diseases and the immunity that is against these diseases. So what are these diseases? Diseases are abnormal or unhealthy state of your body. It can happen in any part of your body that do not function in a normal way. Diseases show signs and symptoms. There are mainly 2 types of diseases, non-communicable diseases, that are diseases that are not infectious, that cannot be transferred from one person to another by touching likewise. It cannot be spread from one person to another. In order to have these non-communicable diseases, it will take a long time. And in order to cure also, it will take long time and it progresses very slowly. And the second group is known as communicable diseases. Communicable diseases include infectious diseases, that are diseases that are caused by pathogenic microorganisms. The main character in this is they can be transmitted from one person to another. So first let's look at non-communicable diseases. If you look at this right hand side, you see this picture, it will show the number of deaths in millions in 2019 recorded based on different diseases. You can see the blue color indicates the non-communicable and the green color indicates the communicable. You can see most of the ones are blue color because 74% of all deaths in the world are because of NCDs or non-communicable diseases. Over 80% of these non-communicable diseases belongs to major 4 categories: cardiovascular diseases, cancers, you can see cardiovascular diseases, these two. Then you can see cancer. Then you can see chronic respiratory diseases here. Then diabetes here. And because of diabetes, the kidney diseases also can happen. So you can see both of them here as main 10 reasons. So these NCDs are resulted by a combination of genetic, physiological, environmental and behavioral factors. People at all age groups, regions, countries are affected by NCDs. The first NCD that I am going to talk to you about is cardiovascular diseases. These cardiovascular diseases are diseases of heart and blood vessels. These include coronary heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, rheumatic heart disease. So, CVDs are number 1 cause of death worldwide. The 4 out of 5 CVD deaths is due to heart attacks or due to stroke. So how does these cardiovascular diseases happen? The most common reason is the buildup of fatty deposits in the inner wall of their blood vessels. If you have more fatty deposits in your blood, it will get deposited in the vessels. This condition we know as atherosclerosis. If you look at this map, you can see this is the death rate from cardiovascular diseases in 2021. You can see in some countries it's very high, like Egypt, Russia, it's high, the death from cardiovascular diseases. So in Egypt it's 612 people in 100,000 people, among 100,000 people die because of the CVDs. If you look at the Thailand, it's in slightly a good condition. It's only 128 people die in 100,000 among 100,000 people. It's slightly better than rest of the world. So what is this atherosclerosis? So how does this happen? So you can say this is a normal artery where there's no blockage to the blood flow. But in persons with atherosclerosis, this is caused up by a buildup of fatty deposits in the arteries. And these deposits are known as plaques, that is made up of fat, cholesterol and calcium. And over time, these fatty deposits become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they slow down the blood flow. And the dead red blood cells can also stuck in there and stops the blood flow, form blood clots easily. So the clots that stop blood flow to the heart, they cause heart attacks. And the clots that stop blood flow to the brain, they cause strokes. So what are the risk factors for these kind of CVDs? One of the main risk factor is age. In addition to that, smoking, high blood pressure and diabetes is the secondary risk factors. So risk factors here you can see I have divided into 2 sections, modifiable factors and non-modifiable factors. Modifiable factors means if we try and change our habits, we can change these risk factors. But non-modifiable risk factors means we cannot change these factors. It's gender, genetics we cannot change, our ethnicity we cannot change. So these factors also affect CVDs. The next disease that I am going to talk to you about is respiratory diseases. Respiratory diseases are diseases of airways and the other structures of the lung. The most common respiratory diseases that we found are chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma. So respiratory disease is the third leading cause. What is the first leading cause? CVDs. And the second leading cause is stroke. And the third leading cause is respiratory diseases. This usually happens in 90% of the low income countries. Both of these, asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, they causes reduced airflow to the lungs. If you look at this, you can see this is a airway of a healthy person, healthy lung. And this is a lung with airway of a lung with asthma. You can see main differences. Here you can see the muscles are relaxed, but here you can see the muscles are tightened. And you can see here the airway is not swell, it's normal. But here you can see it's swell. And here you can see this is the main character. The airflow, the diameter is restricted in the diseased person with the disease. So the mucus clogs the airways and the lungs have the difficulty in moving air. These are actual images of the healthy airway and chronic fibrosis airway. You can see this airway is slightly swollen, and this is alveolus that is inside your lungs. You can see in a person with respiratory diseases, they are swelled. This is the normal condition. This is the swelled condition where you have the disease. So if you look at this map, this is the death rate caused from chronic respiratory disorders in 2021. This is per 100,000 people. And you can see the highest records are from India and Papua New Guinea. And if you look at Myanmar also, it also has a slightly bigger risk. But if you look at Thailand, it is much better. It's in the second category only. It's much better. It's just 24 people among 100,000 people have died because of the chronic respiratory diseases. So what are the risk factors for these chronic disease, respiratory diseases? The main risk factor is tobacco smoking. In addition to that, these are all changeable behavioral patterns: air pollution, occupational hazards, allergens, low birth rate and poor nutrition, obesity. These are the factors, changeable factors. What are the non-modifiable factors that we cannot change? We cannot change our age. We cannot change whether we have respiratory infections from birth. We cannot change our genetics. So these are non-changeable factors. So let's go into our next main disease, that is cancer. Cancer is a disease in which the abnormal cells in your body divide rapidly, uncontrollably, and then invade the nearby tissues. If you look at this figure, you can see these are normal cells. And you can see there are some 3 abnormal cells among these normal cells. When they start dividing, because all the cells divide, but when abnormal cells starts divides, they divide uncontrollably and rapidly. So there becomes a cancer, in situ cancer. And when these cancer cells are near to blood vessels or near to lymph systems, they can be passed from one place to another through blood or lymph system and can affect any body part. In the world now, there are more than 100 types of cancers, more than 100 types. So cancer is the second leading cause of death globally. And if you look at this is the prevalence of cancers. You can see mainly the developed countries have the highest rate of cancer. So like USA, Canada, Australia, actually Australia reported the highest in the world. And if you look at Thailand, it's at the not very safe, but it's at the second or third group category. If you look at the world, different types of cancers in the world, the highest cancer in the world is lung cancer. But if you categorize it based on men and women, the highest occurrence of cancer in men is the lung cancer. The most probable cause may be tobacco smoking and then prostate cancer. But in women, the highest cause of highest incidence is breast cancer. If you look at the situation in Thailand among men the highest cancer is liver cancer, and among women the highest cancer is breast cancer. But if you look at the mortality rate and the incidence rate, not all cancers are very dangerous. Not all cancers can cause death. If you look at this, look at the prostate cancers, even though there is very high incidence, the number of people die from the cancer is less. But if you look at lung cancer, let's see, the incidence is over 1.5 million, but the death is over 1 million. So this is a very serious cancer. Similarly, liver cancer, you can see 500K will get, over 500K will get the cancer, and nearly 500K will die. So these cancers are dangerous. They don't have the same mortality rate. Some cancers can be treated and be cured. If you look at the condition in Thailand, liver cancer has the highest mortality. You can see the incidence and mortality is exactly almost similar. And the second most dangerous one is the lung cancer. But second most highly reported one is the breast cancer. Highly severe one is the lung cancer. So what are the risk factors for cancer? It's also tobacco use, the changeable factors, tobacco use, alcohol consumption, your diet, your physical inactivity, the exposure to the sun, obesity, those kind of things, hormone replacement therapies. What are the non-modifiable factors? Age, sex, family history, genetics, those kind of things are non-modifiable factors. The next disease that we are going to talk today is diabetes mellitus. Diabetes is also an NCD. In this disorder, people with disorder cannot control their insulin amount. They cannot sometimes produce insulin, or sometimes they cannot control the insulin. So let's say if in a healthy person, the pancreas usually produces insulin, and inside the blood it will release into the blood, and there are glucose in your blood, and glucose is important to produce energy inside the cell. So this glucose need to enter into the cell. So this entering, that channel is opened by insulin. Insulin is actually the key to that channel. If you consider that channel as a door, insulin is the key. So there are two types of diabetes, type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. In type 1 diabetes patients, they cannot produce this insulin. Their body cannot produce. Then what happens? The glucose will not go into the cells to be used. They will be available in the cell, in the blood, and the blood glucose level will go high. In type 2 ones, they can produce insulin, but they cannot control it. So still they cannot open it properly, the channel. So more than 95% of the diabetic stages, they are type 2 diabetes. If you look at this, you can see the prevalence of diabetes in 2021. You can see the highest rate occurred in Pakistan, where more than 30.8% of the people in the country have diabetes. And the least, and you can see in Thailand. Thailand is around here, where you have 9.7% of the people in the population have diabetes. So what are the risk factors for diabetes? One of the main risk factors is the obesity, physical inactivity, blood pressure, unhealthy diet, high consumption of sugary drinks. These are all changeable factors. What are the non-changeable factors? Genetics, your age, we cannot change those things, and they can affect your disease. So this is one group of diseases, NCDs. Now let's move on to communicable diseases or CDs. Communicable diseases, also known as infectious diseases. These are caused by pathogenic organisms like viruses, bacteria, fungi and protozoa. The main characteristics of these diseases is they can be transmitted they can be spread or transmitted. So how does the CD spread? One is from human to human. It can be either by direct contact. So if you shake hand, if you touch someone, you can get the disease by body fluids. Or it can be indirectly by if you sneeze, if you cough, and with air droplets the pathogens can go outside. And the second way is from environmental sources. If you eat contaminated food, contaminated water, you can get sick. Another way is from animal to human. There are some diseases that are spread from animal to human. These kind of diseases known as zoonotic diseases. That are diseases that spread between animals and also between animals and humans. So before we talk about the diseases, let's be familiar with this term, incubation period. Incubation period is a time between the exposure of a pathogen and the appearance of the first symptom. So if we take this incubation period depends on the disease or the pathogen that is causing the disease. So here, if a virus gets infected, after 7 days, it will show the first symptom. This is just an example. So what is known as the incubation period? Time of occurrence to the time of appearance of first symptom. So the incubation period here is 7 days. So in this case, what is the incubation period? It's obviously 2 days. So let's move on to each of these diseases. One of the main CDs include respiratory infections like the flu. It's very famous in Thailand, the flu season. The flu is usually caused by an influenza virus. There are different types of influenza viruses that can be spreads or infect different categories of people or different humans, men, different categories of organisms. The flu can be transmitted from animal to another, one animal to another, and also from human to animal. Flu viruses that transfer from birds and pigs are very dangerous. Have you heard of avian flu or swine flu? These are very dangerous flus that has caused many deaths in the past among people. So how you get this flu? You can get flu throughout the year, but you are at the most risk during the flu season. Flu season is different in every country. So do you know the flu season in Thailand? It's from June to October. It is the time when the flu easily spreads. This is mainly due to the environmental conditions. So how does it spread? If an infected person coughs or sneezes, the droplets that is passed in here carries the virus and enter another person through the nose, mouth or both. And then these viruses travel to the lungs and multiplies inside the lungs. And then the infected lungs release these viruses. These viruses then again infect another person when we sneeze or when we cough. So you can see these are some of the symptoms you can see when you get the flu. So how can we protect against this one? You can always cover your mouth or cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze. Not like this. Why? Because if you do like this and touch another surface, you will contaminate that space. But if you do this, it will not affect others. And if you are sick, you can stay at home. You can clean or disinfect the surfaces. And mostly, you can get the flu shot, that is the vaccine. Now it's very famous in Thailand, so if you think you are at risk, you should get the flu vaccine. The next respiratory infection is tuberculosis. This is caused by a bacteria known as Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It mainly affects the lungs. TB also passes through air, and sometimes it takes a decade, that means 10 years to develop the disease. But the good thing about this disease is it can be treated with antibiotic because it's caused by bacteria. It can be treated with antibiotics. And TB is one of the top 10 causes of the death worldwide. And in 2022, an estimated 1.3 million people died of TB. And this is the lowest record. So you can see if the lowest record is 1.3 million, what it have been before. So if you see, look at this map, you can see this is the tuberculosis cases in 2022. You can see the highest record is from India. And if you look at Thailand, it's around 111,000 cases of tuberculosis in India. These are cases. What about the death rate? So the death rate is mostly high in African region, and in Thailand it's around 19 people per 100,000. It's a bit low. But this disease is becoming dangerous in the Asian region mainly because we have drug resistant bacteria. Drug resistant bacteria means the bacteria cannot be killed by antibiotics, and this makes the disease very strong. And the highest number recorded from the drug resistant tuberculosis recorded from India. And you can see it keeps increasing. You can see here the normal tuberculosis is at decline. But if you see the drug resistant tuberculosis cases, it keeps increasing, it's not declining. So this has become a serious issue. The next disease that we are going to talk about, the communicable disease, is malaria. Malaria is caused by the parasite Plasmodium. So malaria is not spread from human to human. Instead, it's a zoonotic disease. Means that it passes by bite of an infected Anopheles mosquito. So if a mosquito bite a person with malaria and then goes to another person and bite again, the pathogen, Plasmodium pathogen, can carry from one person to the healthy person through the bacteria, through the mosquito. So this is one of the diseases that have been eradicated in most part of the world. The incidence of malaria in 2021, you can see most countries does not have any incidence of malaria. But still there are very less incidence of malaria in South American region and in the Asian region. But in African region still there are many cases of malaria. So why? In some parts of the world like here, USA, Canada, Russia, Australia, there's no record of malaria. It's because the widespread use of insecticides to attack the mosquitoes. And mosquitoes usually breed in swamps. So if we change the swamp lands into agricultural lands or the industrial lands, they will restrict the breeding sites for these mosquitoes. And another major thing is the availability of treatment. These are, if you see the most of the countries that eradicated this disease, they are very well developed countries where everyone has the access to health care easily. So there are anti-malarial drugs and vaccines were developed for the malaria control. But similar to tuberculosis, malaria also you can see anti-malarial, the drug-resistant malaria is occurring. This is mainly evident in the greater Mekong sub-region in the world. So it's mainly between the Myanmar and the Thailand border and Thailand and Cambodia border. There is a significant threat to malaria control. Another communicable disease is dengue. Dengue is caused by a virus, and most people usually overcome the virus in few days, but some people it becomes very serious and even kill that person. Similarly, dengue is also not a disease that spread from one human to another. It's also spread as a zoonotic disease through the bites of an infected Aedes aegypti mosquito. The incubation period for dengue is around 4 to 10 days. You can see these are some of the symptoms, and this is how the dengue spreads. So the mosquito bites an infected person and it carries the virus and then infect a healthy person. So this is how it spreads. So this is usually highly occurred in this region. The occurrence is very high in this region. So why is dengue spreading so fast? Is because of the main reason is air travel, increase of air travel in the world. For example, if we take an example, a person flies from Australia to India for a holiday for 7 days. And let's say in the day 5, it get bites from a mosquito, the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and got the infected the virus. So what is the incubation time? What is the time it starts to develop a disease? 4 days. But the person get the bite on day 5. So he will not show any symptoms even on day 7 when he flies back to Australia. There's no symptoms. But after some days in Australia, he will show the symptoms. And then a mosquito in Australia bites the person and then bites another person in Australia, then the disease is traveled to Australia. So likewise, the dengue is spreading very fast. Another communicable disease that you are very familiar with is COVID-19. COVID-19 is also caused by a novel coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2 that started in Wuhan, China in 2019. In 2020, its seriousness is so high, in 2020 it is declared as a pandemic. It spreads through air, and the incubation period for this disease is typically 2 to 14 days with an average of 5 days. I'm not going to talk more about COVID-19 as most of you are very familiar with COVID-19. So what are the treatments available now for COVID-19? There are repurposed drugs, there are immunoglobulin treatments, monoclonal treatments, and there are different vaccines produced against COVID-19 virus. So these are different treatment patterns. The next communicable disease category that we are talking about is sexually transmitted infections. These infections are transmitted from person to person, mostly through sexual contact. And it also can be spreaded from infected blood or infected tissues. If you are in contact with infected blood or infected tissues or body fluids, you can get the disease. Not only that, a mother can pass the disease, STIs, to the fetus inside mother's tummy during pregnancy and at the childbirth. There are around 30 pathogens that cause these STIs. If you see, there are bacteria that cause chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. There are viruses that cause HIV, human papillomavirus, hepatitis. And there are sometimes parasites that cause the disease, like trichomonas. So these pathogens spread through sexual contact. And every day, more than 1 million people get STDs. And most of these STDs are curable. Why STIs are very important? Because if you get an STI, you will be at high risk for getting HIV. It's 3 times higher than a normal person. It can result in dead children being born. It can result in infertility, even death. So how can we protect ourselves? We can have safe sex practices. We can get vaccinated. There are vaccines. For example, human papillomavirus, there are vaccines. And for many STIs, there are vaccines developed. There are treatments available. So if one partner get STI and get treated, both partners need to get treated. Only one partner getting treatment is not enough in STI. The next category that we are going to talk about is the hemorrhagic fevers. Hemorrhagic fevers are fevers mainly caused by viruses like Lassa fever, Rift Valley fever, Ebola, you may be heard of, yellow virus. These are all zoonotic diseases. Many organs are affected by these diseases, and main character of these hemorrhagic fevers are your blood vessels get destroyed and you will start bleeding. So why the hemorrhagic fevers are so dangerous? Because these the agents, the viruses that cause these diseases are used as bioweapons, and most of these diseases have been weaponized now, and they are commonly found in trophics. The mortality rate of the hemorrhagic fever depending on the agent, but it can go up to 90%. So it's very dangerous. So Ebola is the best example of the hemorrhagic fever. It's a very rare but life-threatening illness, specifically found in different parts in Africa first. It is caused by several species of Ebola virus. The incubation period is usually 2 to 21 days, but the death rate is up to 90%. It's very high. First time it occurred in 1976, and then the largest Ebola outbreak happens in 2014 to 2016, where there were more than 28,000 cases and more than 11,000 deaths reported worldwide. So you can see these are some of the symptoms of Ebola disease. There is bleeding. You can see bleeding even when your poo also bleeds. So a lot of bleeding. You can see bleeding here. So how does the Ebola transmit? The Ebola viruses naturally exist in bats, but the bats do not show the disease. So the bats spread the disease into other animals, and these other animals can spread the disease to humans. How? Maybe these animals can bite human. Maybe humans hunt these animals and eat. So by this way, animals spread the disease to humans. Once the human get the virus, it can spread to another person by blood or by other body fluids. In this section is about human microbiome and immunity. So, why human microbiome and immunity is so important? Up to now, we have talked about many diseases. So these diseases, some of the factors are included inside our body. The diet, these kind of factors. And human microbiome is another factor that can affect your healthy state, that can affect the state of your body. And immunity is important because immunity is the factor that protects you from your diseases. So what is human microbiome? So we earlier learned that cell is the basic building block of life. How many cells in human body? There are around 36 trillion cells in your body. And there are around 38 trillion microbes in your body. So the number of microbes in your body is higher than the number of cells. And there are over 10,000 different microbial species that exist in different parts of your body. It can be bacteria, it can be archaea, it can be fungi, it can be algae, it can be protozoans, it can be viruses. There are many others. And Every place in your body, in many surfaces and many organs, they have these microbes. And microbiome is very distinct to each site. And in each site, they have different functions. Usually, most microbes are found in the gut, in the large and small intestine. And the lowest number of microbes are found in brain, in the central nervous system, according to the recent reports. It can affect the stress, your behaviors, those kind of things it can affect. And you cannot find any microbes in cornea of your eyes. You cannot find any microbes there. Except for that place, all other places and surfaces, there are microbes in your body. So what does these microbes do? They help with the digestion. They can break down fiber. They can synthesize vitamin, for example, vitamin K, they can synthesize. They can support immune system. They can compete with other pathogens and produce antimicrobial compounds. So they can compete with the other pathogens. They can break down foreign compounds like drugs, preservatives that you take. They can break down. They support the bone health by absorbing calcium. They influence your brain health. They affect your mood. They affect your stress conditions. They affect your behavior. So this is how the microbes in your body affect your body. And recent research has told that healthy person, the overall health of a person is linked to the balanced microbiome. If good overall health is linked to a balanced microbiome. So what is known as good or balanced microbiome? If you look at this picture, you can see this is a balanced microbiome. You can see many types of different microbes. There are round ones, square ones, ones with flagella, ones with, rounds. So there are different types of bacteria or fungi or viruses. But if with time some of these the organisms get affected by different things that we do, our diet, the antibiotics that we take, the drugs that we take, it can affect. So it gives an unbalanced microbiome. You can see the main difference between unbalanced and balanced. There is very few types of microbes in the unbalanced microbiome. So if you have an unbalanced microbiome for a long time, with years, it can lead to obesity, it can lead to diabetes, it can lead to colon cancer. So it's kind of a dangerous situation that you need to be taken care of. So what is meant by a balanced microbiome? What are the factors that affect the balanced microbiome? The first factor is diet. It is believed that, not believed, it is shown that Mediterranean diet provides a good microbiome, basically for the gut microbiota. Mediterranean diets includes many vegetables, many fruits, many grains, dairy, meat products, and fish and others. But in the world today, many of us prefer the Western diet. In Western diet, there is very little fruits, very little vegetables, and very little grains. But there are many high calorie food, sugary food. So because of these factors, the microbiota get imbalanced, and it can cause many diseases. Other than diet, there are several other factors that also affects the microbiome, like genetics, like stress, drugs, those kind of things. So since you have an idea about your microbiome, I'm going to talk a bit about your immunity, because we have talked previously about vaccines. So I'm not going to go into deep about immunity, because you need to know what protects you. How can you protect yourself against these diseases? And how can you prepare for these diseases by doing genetic testings or by understanding your inheritance patterns? So in immunity, in your body, when your body responds to diseases in mainly two ways. Some responses are non-specific. They are usually the first line of defense. And some responses are very specific towards a particular organism, a particular pathogen. So non-specific responses, they are very quick, they occur very quickly. Usually these includes the first line of defense and the innate immunity, internal defenses. The first line of defenses, they include the barrier defenses like skin, secretions and mucous membranes. In addition to that, your white blood cells, the phagocytic cells, the inflammatory responses, natural killer cells, these all provide protection, and it all gives non-specific responses against pathogenic microorganisms. So these responses are highly rapid. The other group is specific responses. They are very slow, but importance of this kind of a response is they can be keep in the memory of a human cell. They can, the memory of the infection can be kept in your DNA sequence data. So it includes antibodies, it includes cytotoxic cell T cells likewise. So these cell types produces the specific immunity against the people. So if your immunity is low, or if your immunity is not as expected, not like other people, how can you boost your immunity? One way is through vaccines. The vaccines is an artificial immunization process. In this artificial immunity, the vaccines boost your immune system. So up to now, the vaccines have saved around 2 to 3 million lives per year. It provides protection against polio, rubella, measles, tetanus, HPV, diphtheria. There are many other diseases. So how they work? The vaccines work by imitating the bacteria or imitating the virus. When they imitate the virus or bacteria inside your body, a response is produced against those imitating factors, which is very strong and specific. This is how the vaccines controls the disease. Before the vaccines were introduced, you can see there are some diseases that occur in high numbers. For example, diphtheria. Before the vaccines introduced, there were around 200,000 people in US with the disease. But now, it's less than 1 after the vaccine. And the best scenario for vaccine usage is the smallpox. Smallpox has killed many people in the world in the past. But now, the smallpox is completely eradicated from the world. So now there are no patients with smallpox. It's mainly because of the vaccines that is produced. So with this, you can understand how the vaccines work and why it is important to get to know this information. So you can get a brief understanding of how your body works, what controls your body. How can you identify whether you have risk for particular disease? How can you identify your traits like blood type, your skin color, your hair color, your eye color, how can you identify? Not the skin color, sorry. And then you can identify different types of diseases. What are the diseases? What are the factors that cause these diseases? And then you can get proper precautions to prevent them. So with this, I'm going to finish my lecture here. So if you have any questions, you can email. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks.